Hello from Cork.
Hello from New York.
It's Misha Moira Shanachie Corky. It's Maria, the Cork-based storyteller.
It's me, Jim, here in Fayetteville, New York.
We can't wait to tell you a few stories. Oh, now I've been thinking about wisdoms, Jim, and the wisdoms that we have in stories that can't come through books or through any other way than by stories. That it's like stories hold wisdom. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree because wisdom is not just a simple lesson, it's a collection of values that we hold going forward. Stories hold collections like that, they don't just carry a single meaning.
So my grandmother also, we'd sit down and we'd have these really deep conversations when I was a very young child. And she said, sometimes your brain can get in the way. And what's intelligent today mightn't be intelligent in 10 years' time. And she gave me the example of everybody believing that the world was flat at one stage. And then through science, we know now that it's round, but it was the accepted intelligence of the time, which is different from wisdom, So wisdom is more like what you feel in your gut rather than a fact that's told you.
We used to talk about the difference between data and knowledge and understanding. And yeah,
Yes,
wisdom is the understanding.
exactly. Sometimes you can be told a story and it can mean this to you in this moment. And then 10 years later, it can mean that to you. And then 10 years later, again, it can mean something completely different, you know.
And in the moment, I know we've both had this experience. You're telling a story to a group of people, and they all hear something different coming out of it.
Yeah. And I love those stories that you tell where the audience takes a bit of ownership of it. And you might say, oh, the woman wearing the yellow dress in the green field. And they go, no, she was wearing a blue dress. Remember her.
I saw her myself.
Yeah, good. It shows a real deep emotional connection to the story when that happens. So I always see it as a great thing, and I have a giggle to myself when that happens. Um, but I also love the shape shifting nature of stories. And we have found this, we've explored it in our previous programs, where the same story can appear in different countries, and you think that it's your story.
I might even know that it's my story, but it isn't.
Yes, in your bones, you know it. And that makes it your story.
Yeah,
But it can also, I suppose, belong to somebody else. So wise stories can wear different dresses.
yeah.
They don't really belong to anybody, but they belong to everybody, you know. And if you explore them in the right way, they can really connect us and they can dissolve the differences between us.
Mm-hmm. And they can dissolve the barriers between us.
Absolutely right. You know,
I don't want to lose the differences.
yes, because that's the spice, isn't it?
It
That's the
is.
salt and pepper of life. So, and I suppose I've been thinking about this because Nós Sheila is in my mind at the moment. And sometimes in tough situations, a story can make the unsayable sayable so that you can look at it together, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, might you have a story for us today?
I have indeed. It's been haunting me at the edges of my consciousness. And now I think I'll share it with you and maybe we'll come back to some of the wise, indicators at the end of it. Once upon a time, there was a forest. It was called the Unknown Forest. It wanted it that way. It needed it that way. Because in that time, the children of the forest were in danger in the presence of men. But of course, there are exceptions. And the exceptions were the Nós Sheila, the wise women. One of these wise women, who lived at the edge of the forest and was called Nós Sheila, Sheila of the old ways, Sheila of the ancient traditions. Well, she was a Ban Feasa, a wise woman. And as you would walk through the forest, you might come across her little house, and you'd look in the window and you'd think to yourself, this is so small, this is so tiny, how can somebody live here? But if you opened the door, if you welcomed yourself into her little space where she had the warm fire with the dancing flames, where she put always a kettle on top of the flames so that the water was always singing or boiling. You know that singing time just before the water boils? And when you come in, she'd pour the singing water into a cup, and you might tell her why you were there. You might say to her, oh, Sheila, I have pains in my bones. My fingers are not working right, and I can't play the music for the dance. And she might give you a tea with lavender in it, or nettle, or licorice. She might massage her own heat into your bones to give you comfort and to allow you to play your music. Or you might come in and you might say, Sheila, I have busy brain today. I can't stop making lists. I can't remember, did I lock the door? Did I leave the iron on? What are my children up to? Oh, what do I have to do for next week? And she'd say, sit down there. And she'd give you a blanket that she made herself. And it might be made of wool or silk. And as you supped something warm and sweet from her cup, she might sing you an old song. Shaheen Shololo, Shaheen Sho Mokri. And by the time she was at the end of the first sentence, you'd be sleeping away. Your eyes might hop open and you might say, Sheila, did you leave me sleep? And she'd say, sure, isn't that why you came to see me? And she'd give you a package of tea and she'd send you on your way. Now, Sheila knew how to listen to dreams. And one night, in the middle of the night, she woke up and she was sitting stark upright inside in the bed. She'd had a dream that the grandmother tree was calling her. The grandmother tree is the first tree in the forest. And as she grows, she throws her seeds out around her and her babies begin to grow. And then new species come in and they begin to lean their heads towards one another, and a more mature forest comes about. And over time, it becomes an ancient forest. And this forest was an ancient forest. And grandmother had lived a very long, long time and had a lot of wisdom. And now she called Nós Sheila to her in the middle of the night, in the middle of her dreams. Nós Sheila ran down the stairs, putting her little cloak around her shoulders in her bare feet. And even though the stars were not shining that night, and even though the moon was on her holidays, she didn't need to use her eyes, for the soles of her feet knew every inch of that forest. Finally, she came to the grandmother tree. Just as the dawn was beginning to break, she leaned her head back against grandmother and she began to fall to sleep. Deep in that place that needs no language, grandmother let her know that she was afraid for her children, for the farmers were fighting. The farmers are fighting, Sheila. What will I do about that? Sheila began to rise up through the layers of sleep until her eyes fluttered open. And then she thought to herself, well, what am I going to do about that? I don't know what to do about the fighting farmers. And then she did what she did whenever she had a question that she didn't know the answer to. She allowed her eyes to become soft, to let the focus blur a little bit. She allowed her eyes to wander along the landscape to see something that didn't fit there, not quite. And on top of a mucky hill, she saw a pristine white feather. She picked that feather up and she pulled her fingers through it. And as the fronds separated, every colour you can imagine could be seen between those fronds, and some colours that have not yet been invented. And she felt the change. She felt her neck becoming longer. She felt her shoulders going behind. She felt her strong arms become strong wings as she transformed into a swan. She took to the air high above the trees. And as she looked at them, she saw how the trees leaned into one another, but never took too much space. It seemed as if they were whispering to one another, as if they were keeping one another company. There is so much we can learn from trees. And she flew to the edge of the forest where she saw them. The fighting farmers, their faces red with rage, and they pointing at one another and at the edge of the forest, as much to say, that is the next place that we will clear. The heaviness of it pushed her down, down, down through the trees until she was finally at the roots of Grandmother Tree once more. What am I supposed to do about that? She said. And she called on Gach na Gaoithe, the voice of the wind. And the wind began to rise and began to play through the branches of the trees. And in its song, she heard, call the people of the Tees. Call the people of the Tees. Of course, all those people that she had nourished with the bounty from this forest. So she sat in front of the tree and she allowed herself to make an intention. When was the last time you made an intention? And she began to call the people of the tea. In her mind, you understand. In her mind, she said, if you're there and if you're free, and if you can, come to me. People of the tea, come to me. And it didn't take long before the first arrived through the Ceodriachta, through the magical mist. And that person said, Sheila, I had this strange dream, and you told me to listen to my dreams, so I'm here, looking for you. And then another one came, and another one, and another one, until they had a lovely group. And she said to them, find a feather. So they began to look all around. Some people, they plucked the feather from the branch of the tree. More, they dug it from the muck and cleaned it down. More from the back of an animal or the beak of a bird. And some people put out their hand and the feather floated into their hand, because that is the luck of some people. And she said to them, pull your fingers through the feather. And so they did. And they felt the change, the connection to the one in front, the connection to the one behind, to the right, to the left, for they had become a murmuration of starlings. They had but one thought between them now as they took to the sky, up over the forest, as they flew to where the fighting farmers were, as they flew between the sun and the fighting farmers. And the farmers looked up. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you look up if you saw a shadow in the sky? And as they looked up, the birds, they took on the shape of a heart. And as if they had planned it, at the very same second, they all beat their wings. And that heart came to life right there in front of their eyes, right there in the sky. And the farmers started smiling. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you smile if you saw something like that? And when they looked down, when they looked into one another's eyes, they were still smiling. They put down their tools and they made an agreement to go home, for they knew that they had enough.
Wonderful. Wonderful. They knew they had enough. I think we've said between us before, that's one of the marks of abundance is that you have enough to give away. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, very true. In my beautiful folklore and culture course with Shane Lehan, an amazing man, we were talking about dolls. And when I was growing up, you'd have one precious doll, and you could put all your love into that doll. And now kids, they have collections of things, but they don't have the connection to things.
Connection to connection instead of collection.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
Well, I have a story. What do you know?
Yay.
And this time, it's not a Jewish story. It's a story from the Roma people of Eastern Europe, the other travelers. As so often is the case in these stories, there was a king and a queen, and they didn't have children. And so many stories start out this way. One of the things I'm drawn to is how did that make them feel? And they each had a very different reaction. The king was disappointed. I mean, he wanted an heir, which meant he wanted a son. And the queen was different. The queen was sad because she wanted a child. She didn't care about an heir. She wanted a child. But neither of them was happy, and so, of course, things were miserable. And the queen said, you know what? I think I will find a way to take care of this. And so what did she do? She went to a wise old woman, because where else would you go? And she found a woman who was living in the forest. And the wise old woman looked at her and said, this is a challenge. I can help. But let me tell you, you will never have a son. I can help you have a daughter, but I can't help you have a son. Well, that was fine for the queen. That's exactly, she just wanted a child. And she said, oh, I'll do it. What do I need to do? Well, here was the prescription that she gave her. She had to go out on the evening of Good Friday, in the middle of the night, go into the cemetery, and just before midnight, dig up the bone of a hanged man and bring it home. Then, on Easter Monday, grind it into a powder. Now, go and find a young girl who is exactly 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, and 7 days old. Mix that hair with the powder and boil it with some seeds of fresh apples in a pot that hasn't been used before. When it's all finally a porridge, eat it, and then you can have a daughter. And I have to say, that is such a strange prescription and such a difficult one. I mean, to have everything ready, you have to have a girl who has the hair that is 7 days old on Easter Monday. I mean, but she made it happen. And sure enough, she was pregnant. And sure enough, the months sped by. And sure enough, she gave birth. But she gave birth to a rose. Wasn't a baby girl. The beautiful rose. But it was a rose. And as soon as it was delivered, it flew out of the window. And it got entangled in a rose bush that was growing up the side of the castle wall. Well, everybody screamed. They called to the king. And the king ran out into the garden and he got his servants and they were trying to pull the rose out, but they couldn't. And the king was furious because, he wanted a son and all she gave him was a rose. and they couldn't even get rid of it. He accused her of being a witch. This was the last straw for him. He said, "Get out of my country. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'll find someone else." And so she was expelled from her labor bed immediately. Well, she crept off into the garden. She sat beneath a rose and she just cried. She just cried because now, what did she have left? And as she sat there crying, she started to kiss the rose. It was the last thing she had left. And the rose spoke to her. And the rose said, "You don't have to cry. Everything's going to be all right. Drink a little drop from my calyx, the lower petals of me. And if you drink just a sip of that, you'll always have all the food and drink that you ever need. You'll be taken care of for the rest of your life." So she reached up and she took a sip and it's amazing. And it not only let her know that she was going to be taken care of body-wise, food and drink, but it started to nourish her soul too. And she realized she didn't have to fear that she would be taken care of. And so she left. And she found her way back into that forest. And you know what? She found a cave, a beautiful, spacious cave filled with crystals and gems, filled with light. And there was a soft, mossy place that she could lay down. There was a brook running through it. Wonderful things that were growing that she could eat. Birds came and sang to her. Other animals brought her other things to eat. And it turned into a good life. The animals became her family, and she would sing with them and she would dance with them. And flowers started to grow all around inside the cave. And you know what? She was happy because she knew this had been a gift of her daughter, the rose. And things continued there for quite a while. I mean, she lost track of time. But of course, they hadn't lost track of time back in the kingdom. The king was not happy, and as if it was a finger in his eye, the rose continued to grow and become more and more beautiful. And every season, even in the winter, it would blossom and bloom. And whenever he came over to admire the rose, it would pull away from him. Sometimes it would droop. It wouldn't let him touch it at all. And now it was like, I couldn't get a son, and I kind of had a daughter, but she won't. And he said, I'm going to get rid of you somehow. And he started to try and have people cut it down, but it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. And finally, in desperation, he said to the rose, why are you treating me this way? And she spoke to him as you would speak to a young child. You sent my mother away. What did you expect? This is how you treat my mother. This is how I treat you. He realized that he really did. He was really to blame here. So he said, I'll bring your mother back. We'll make it all right. So he sent people out to try and find her. And it took a long time. But word had kind of spread about this amazing, beautiful woman living in a cave fed by the animals. They found her, and they promised her that the king felt badly for what he has done and implored her to come back home. And she did, because she wanted to see her daughter. And so when she arrived at the home, at the castle, everything got brighter. The rose, if it could have blossomed more, it would have. It was just so happy to see her. And the word spread throughout the kingdoms. People would come and they would bring gifts and they would admire this beautiful, beautiful rose. But what was really in the king's heart was that it should be a person, not a rose. And he was ready for a daughter, but a rose, it's still. So the king sent out for sorcerers, good sorcerers, bad sorcerers, anybody who thought that they could transform this rose into a person. But unsurprisingly, none of them worked. Until one day, a wandering musician came to the courtyard and he saw the beautiful rose and he started to sing to it. And the more he sang to it, the more it blossomed, and love grew in his heart, and it grew in his music, and he sang more and more beautiful music and songs to it, until finally the inner petals opened up, and there was a young girl. And they kissed. And she said, if only someone had sung to me before now, I would have come out much sooner. Well, of course, everyone was thrilled to see the daughter there. She stepped out of the rose. She and the musician embraced. The king said, you can marry my daughter. And so he became the prince. And the king got his son, sort of. He got his heir. But more importantly, the beauty and the love of Rose, his daughter, and the musician filled the castle and filled the kingdom for years to come.
Oh, I love it so much. And it reminds me of all of those stories that says, be careful what you wish for, you know, or, kind of just because you want it, it might be what you need,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, oh my God, that was so nice. It reminds me of this fantastic initiative I'm involved in called Soul of Cities. And they're looking at how our stories are so important. They're like a nourishment. They are, aren't they, Jim? Yeah,
There are nourishment, there are history, there
yeah,
are dreams for the future.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're our fact and our mystery.
Yes. Absolutely.
But this has been so nice.
Yeah, it has. So as I look at these stories, um, wondering what kind of wisdoms we might pull from them. And now others will find their own, right?
Yeah,
I know for me, in my story, one of the things that speaks to me is the power of unbidden love. He just loved the rose, the musician did. And he expressed it with feeling, not with spells or demands or anything like that. It was just unconditional love. That's the word I'm looking
yeah.
for.
His
That,
salvation. It was his salvation that he followed his heart, and it was almost the king's undoing that he didn't invest his heart, you know. So yeah. Oh, I love that, you know. I also enjoyed listening to your story and seeing your face in the telling. So it's very important to be at the face of the storyteller, and to receive stories. It's so
yes.
different than reading a story in a book.
Oh, entirely, entirely. Yeah, there's something so special about spoken oral storytelling and not just read stories, but told
Or
stories.
told stories, and for me there's a huge nourishment in the listening and also in the telling, so it's our first human art as we're kids, before we can use our hands. We're listening to how people say things, and before we know language, we know tone. We know that means don't do it. We know, "Well, I love you, I love you." We know those sounds as well, I have a brand new grandniece, and she coos to me, she's like, "Ooh." When I tell her beautiful things about herself.
That reminds me when I was starting my training in this kind of storytelling, which was many years ago, a lot of the classes were held over a phone, over a conference call.
Yeah.
And the way new students had to introduce themselves by sharing a story. It was my turn. And I tell you, I had poured my heart into this story I was going to tell. And I really knew I wanted to get it right. So I had written it down. I was going to ace this one. And so, nobody could see me, they could just hear my voice. And I started to read the story I had written. And I didn't finish the first sentence when my teacher said, "You're reading that story, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, you're not here to learn to be a story reader. You're here to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
So don't ever read a story again. And not that you shouldn't read it, but don't tell a story by reading it." Yeah. And that was a huge challenge because I had been doing a lot of public speaking and it was always, Oh, I was so proud of the words I had chosen, to give them all up and speak extemporaneously was a huge challenge, but it opened up so many doors.
I
So
know, like people would be saying, I'm so shy of public speaking, and I was in Toastmasters for a long time, and I'm recently back to them, and I've never had a written speech because I was brought up in an oral household. So so lucky,
yes, yes,
Yeah, but there is a big difference, and isn't it amazing that he could hear you reading even though he could not see you?
in the
Yeah,
first sentence,
because it's such a different rhythm. When you're seeing something, when you're seeing something in your mind's eye and you're telling something of that to someone, you're putting that image in their mind.
you
It's
are
it,
absolutely.
it's like magic. It's alchemy. I don't know how it works, but I know it's very different than if you're reading something.
And I'll just put this little thing at the end of that, which is we know how it works. There's this thing called neural coupling. And when two people are speaking to each other,
Yeah,
their brains start to synchronize.
yeah,
And they synchronize about not just the words that are being spoken, but their whole brain patterns start to synchronize. And just like we said before, how stories contain more than just one piece of wisdom, our brains contain all our knowledge. So
yeah.
that as we share our brain synchronies, we
Think
share
so.
more than even the story is
Very
getting
true.
shared.
But our
Yeah,
guts are also syncing up. I mean, if you
absolutely.
hold a new baby, which I'm holding at the moment because of my gorgeous grandniece, Emily,
Yeah.
when you hold their back into your belly, you can
Yes.
help them to digest. It's
Yes.
amazing,
Yes. Yes.
So when you're in deep story with somebody, it's your heart, it's your mind, it's your emotions,
Yes.
it's everything. It syncs up. It's so amazing,
It's
you
your
know?
scent. It's everything.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All of that.
Oh,
And I suppose with the story that I told today, it came from a system of story making that was handed on to me by my grandmother and my great granny and my mom. And it's kind of you're walking and you walk at a different pace when a story is coming, and you might get an image here or an image there. Then you might start dreaming of the story, and then the story can birth itself in its entirety. And that's what happened with Nós Sheila. I was out with the Forestry School of Ireland, and we were all in a little bit of grief over the fact that we're losing the forests in Ireland and that we need to do something about it. Then they informed me that they were going to feed me from the forest. And I was thinking, will the forest have enough food for all of us? And then at the end of the day, they made a beautiful soup and they made a salad from the forest,
hmm hmm
and it was one of the most delicious meals I've ever had at the edge. And it was the bounty of the forest. And then we started pulling threads. And I said, "Who do you see?" And they say, "We see a wise woman." And Sheila came into my head. And now she became like an old friend. And I could see every part of her face, the wrinkles around her eyes, the color of her eyes, how tall she was. She really walked into my consciousness. And I suppose that's a gift of story. But I believe that those threads wove themselves in to me through them. And
Sure.
that's the gift of co-creation,
Yes.
you know. We've talked about it earlier in this conversation as being a meeting of mind and heart and, the neuro pathways and
Yes.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I think it's more magic than that.
I think magic is absolutely real. And if it is, then it will manifest its ways in all sorts of other physical things. The fact that our brains sync up doesn't mean it isn't magic. It means that's the way the magic is working. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, And I remember hearing one time in the many story roads that both of us have been on, Jim, that Einstein said that magic was anything that worked that we didn't have a scientific answer for.
And it's all about discovering more and
All of
more and
that.
more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, Maria,
So
this has just been a delight again.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's been lovely being on the story road with you for another week,
For
Jim.
another week. I'm really looking forward to our next encounter as well. So we'll say goodbye for now.
Yeah. And to teach you a small bit of the Irish, Slán Pól, goodbye for a small way. Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the story road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the story road.